All right, good morning. So, first session of the morning, after a long night of drinking, we can tackle a very easy subject, like how do we make sense of all the marketing technology landscape that's out there. I was trying to think of a metaphor for this, and this image came to mind. This idea that here we are, we're the marketer, we're going down this like raging river of constantly changing technology. There are these just dangerous rocks at every turn that we could smash up against. And my hope is to be the paddle. Not sure if that's actually a great metaphor now that I think about it. For those of you who don't know the classes of whitewater, it's 6 classes, 5 or 6, depending on how you think of it. There's Disney World, which is class 1, class 2, class 3, get a little bit more adventurous. By the time you get to class 4, you really do want to be fairly experienced at doing this. And class 5 is pretty much for experts. You can get yourself hurt if you don't know what you're doing. In fact, you can get yourself hurt if you do know what you're doing. They also have a class 6 whitewater rapids, which from what I've understood is basically suicidal. In fact, if anyone actually does a class 6 rapid and survives, I think they reclassify it to class 5. So anyways, good to know. We're dealing with class 5 here. Just a little clarification, as David said there, I wear 2 hats. One hat is I'm the co-founder and CTO of a marketing software company myself. We make a platform for marketing apps. And the other hat I wear is as this blogger at chiefmartech.com. And that's the hat that I will be wearing for today's presentation. I started the blog 6 years ago, just frankly from a career that was always at the intersection of these two worlds, just finding it fascinating how this explosion of technology coming into marketing was changing the definition of what marketing did. It was changing marketing management, marketing culture. And increasingly, I think we're seeing the way that marketing and technology interplay is changing strategy as well. And before we dive into the details of the technology, I think it's worth just stepping back and realizing, why is this technology so important? Why should we spend so much time and effort thinking through this? It's because we know we are now marketing in a digital world. And there's just this simple law that everything digital is controlled by software. And in marketing, this is so incredibly powerful because software really does become marketing's interface to reality. For the far majority of situations, this is how we see and touch our audience. I mean, don't get me wrong, I highly recommend picking up the phone, talking to real customers. I recommend going on site, actually seeing people, seeing their pain points, firsthand. We should do more of that. But for almost everything else, which is largely 95%, we're relying on software to be our hands and our eyes. And this can have a huge impact on what we see and what we do. I mean, you think about it, your choice of marketing analytics software will affect your perceptions of what you think your audience is doing. Your choice of marketing automation software, well, depending on what's easy or hard to do, it's going to shape the sorts of processes you put in place. Social media software, you get into more sophisticated systems, right? These are guiding the ways we have engagements with people. What I do with customer experience software, the capabilities we have or don't have in our software changes the sorts of touch points that you will deliver to your customers. CRM systems, by their very definition, are about structuring this relationship in data that we have with customers. I mean, really powerful stuff. In fact, one more metaphor I want to kind of just hit you with before we get into this is, because I know as marketers, we understand channels and channel management and the complexities there. I would argue that in a digital world, software is a channel itself. I mean, if you think about where we start as a marketer, we interface to this whole world of technology that we're using inside our businesses. And we'll go into that in a lot more detail here. But then that software is interfacing to independent services, the Googles, the Facebooks, the Twitters, a whole explosion of things that are outside of our control, but become one of the stages we pass through in interfacing to our prospects and customers. And then even our prospects and customers have a bunch of software that they're running. I mean, depending on what mobile device they're using, depending on their browsers, browser plugins, are they blocking cookies? I mean, these things can have an enormous impact on what's going back and forth along this channel. And so this whole gauntlet stands between us, the marketer, and the customer we want to deal with. So pretty powerful stuff. And it's a big, hairy mess. So this is, I guess, the graphic that I tend to be known for, and I'd like to apologize for that right up front. Before we get into that, actually, I will make a disclaimer, because I know there's a lot of marketing technology vendors in the room, some of which may have pitchforks. I'm merely an armchair analyst. This map that I'm going to walk you through here is not intended to be the definitive state of marketing technology. It's really just a conversation piece. One person's opinion of how these things seem to be fitting together. So if you're not in the category you want to be, cut me some slack. So I started doing these graphs actually a few years ago. There's a guy, Terry Kawaja, Luma partner, who does these amazing Lumascapes. He, at the time, had done one for ad tech. That was really what he was known for, but he hadn't done one yet for marketing tech. And so I put the first one of these together in 2011, and there were about 100 companies on the map, which at the time everyone was like, oh my God, there are that many marketing software companies? Well, a year went by, and I did another version, and I apologize, my organizational skills degraded from one year to the next. But just counting it, the number of new companies that were in the space, or old companies that were coming into the space, much larger, 3 times, 350 companies. So shortly after that, Terry actually came out with his Lumascape for marketing technology, which was a huge relief for me because I thought I could finally retire from the moving little logos on a page business. Then after that, Gartner came out with their digital transit map. And, there started to be a lot more visualizations for just what does this landscape of marketing technology look like. But I came out of retirement for this version that was produced here in January for a reason I'll explain in a moment. But as I started to put this together, I realized, well, there's a lot more companies here now. Man, there's probably 400, 500, 600. I got to the end, and I counted them up, and it was 950 unique companies. And then as soon as I posted this, I literally heard from hundreds of other very real companies that were incredibly upset. No, that's not how to say it. Suggested that I might be better informed to include them in the next version, particularly if I appreciated my kneecaps. So that was good to know. But the thing that got me to do this was the realization that that big mess from the year before was actually starting to get some semblance of order. And this is kind of what I want to walk through. I'm not saying it's perfect, but here's one way I think we can start to think of the emerging structure in the marketing technology landscape. So there's 6 classifications. The far corner I don't even do justice to, but it's all these internet services that we as marketers are using. And this is a huge portion of the technology that we need to understand and become fluent at using. Google, Yahoo, Quora, Meetup, all those things. But then we get into actual software that we have in our domain. And there's a chunk of stuff that we'll just call infrastructure. I'm not doing justice to it here, but it's this idea that we rely on a whole bunch of software that isn't specifically built for marketing, but we use it. Database systems, increasingly big data systems, big data management, cloud systems, if you're running applications up in Amazon. Certainly a lot of people doing, little web development projects, mobile development. So there's a bunch of amazing software out there. But then we get to the stuff that's specific to marketing. And I felt that the main layer we want to talk about here is this idea of marketing backbone platforms, because there's 4 types of software that almost every marketing group ends up dealing with, or at least a pretty good subset of. Certainly there's this idea of the CRM, or something like a CRM, becomes our customer data repository. There's a whole explosion of marketing automation, which, interesting, when I was putting this together, I'd been following the narrative that marketing automation was consolidating as an industry. And there are, some amazing, now large companies doing this. But there's also a lot of new companies that are coming into the space, a lot of new innovation to keep an eye on. There's website, CMS software, content management software, now customer experience software, pick your label. Everyone has a website, so we almost always need that technology. If we're doing transactional work, we have e-commerce engines typically in the loop there as well too. And the interesting thing about these backbone platforms is they probably do 80% of what we're talking about in marketing technology. Now, there's a new category that isn't quite the platform layer yet, but I think is incredibly fascinating. And I called it marketing middleware because this is software that, among other things, helps you get more value out of all the other software you're already using. Data management platforms, customer data platforms, something like Lattice, right? Where you're able, if you have a series of existing systems with existing data, you plug Lattice on top of that, and it helps you get more value out of those things. Tag management systems, right? Making it easier to have all sorts of cool plugins in your website. User management for single sign-on and across different applications. An interesting group of cloud connector software. Folks like If This Then That, Zapier, Kevi, folks who are making it easier to sort of sit in the middle between all these different software things and let you just use, a nice user interface for connecting the data between them. API management, right? As marketers, we're increasingly dealing with the API economy too. Okay, so this is sort of a layer of foundational stuff. And then I believe it bifurcates into two classifications of more specialized applications on top. And I'll roughly lump them into the categories of marketing operations and marketing experiences, with the idea that marketing operations is mostly what we're doing behind the scenes in marketing, the management of marketing. So we've got business intelligence software, we've got our web and mobile analytics, there's a whole robust category of dashboards. Dashboard's going to be big. Marketing analytics, because I couldn't think of a better catch-all title for all these companies that are doing really cool things of helping you get value and insight out of your marketing data. Tools we use for agile and project management, digital asset management, marketing resource management. There's a lot of blending between these categories. Our good host from Marcom Central, one of the leaders in this space, channel and local marketing, using these technologies to help manage partner relationships, marketing data quality control, third-party data that we get access to. A lot of cool stuff there. Man, I get exhausted just reading through this, much less having to actually build any of it. And then we get to the marketing experiences group, which is the largest and most surprising. John Miller is still here. Hey, you thought Vortex was cool. Watch this little magic trick. All right, now we've got a little bit of room to at least look at these categories. Some things we've known for years, right? Email marketing, a very old category. Mobile marketing, very new category. Whole collection of advertising technologies, things, these first touch points that we have with customers. And it's interesting, ad tech is a really big space, but in comparison to the marketing technology universe overall, it's actually pretty small, maybe about 15%. Software we use for events, event management, both in-person events, the folks at Cvent here who are doing the mobile app for this, online webinars, online events, all sorts of cool stuff there. Huge collection of social media marketing management software out there. Software we use for communities and reviews, creative design, testing and optimization, not just simple A/B testing, but things with multivariate, things with user testing, things with like multi-step application testing, loyalty and gamification, customer experience, voice of the customer software, call management, call center management software, sales enablement, which is sort of one foot in marketing experiences and one foot in marketing operations. Content marketing, very rich category at this point, right? Everything from new ways of presenting content to curating it to managing the flow of creating it. Search engine optimization software, very robust category. And last but not least, the category my company plays in of marketing apps, of people creating things for like online contests and surveys and wizards and configurators and calculators and fun things like that. So there's a bunch of categories, actually, believe it or not, I missed, as a number of people have informed me. But, this is, again, just kind of a rough idea of what's out there. And I think what's interesting from our perspective is to even just take a look at this narrative of over a 3 to 4 year period, right? We went from 100 companies that were easily identifiable, multiplied by 3 to 350, another 3 times, over 1,000. I mean, to step back and recognize that marketing has more software available to it now than any other business function in the entire history of computing, I mean, it's a pretty spectacular time. Someone said yesterday it's the golden age of marketing, which I do believe. It's also the golden age of marketing software, which leads us to the big question on most people's minds is this really sustainable? I mean, come on, 1,000 marketing technology vendors. Most people in the audience, you're probably thinking to yourself, well, good God, I hope not. And I mean, if you look back over the history of software, right? I mean, this is how it happens. There's an explosion of, new technologies. They start to, get consolidated, purchased, some die out, and eventually you have a small set of winners. And so I think the conventional narrative is to look at that huge landscape and say, this is going to consolidate down to a really small number of vendors. That's probably true, but I'd like to give you an alternate narrative to think about, because I think it might change how you want to make decisions about managing marketing technology moving forward. And that is, this is a very different software market than any other market that had preceded it. And the reason why, and there's a couple of things here. We'll take a look at this from the supply side and the demand side. From the supply side, there are 5 forces that have come together for people who are launching software companies that are really pretty incredible. I mean, first is, we hear about this all the time, cloud-based platform as a service, infrastructure as a service, the Amazon Web Services is, sort of classic example of this. You can have an entrepreneur sitting at Starbucks with a few clicks on their keyboard deploy the sort of just global, redundant, high-volume infrastructure that previously would have taken companies tens of millions of dollars and years to be able to bring to bear. And they can just pretty much do that on demand. And they can do it only when they have customers who are paying them for that. They can scale this up relatively quickly. I mean, platforms as a service, infrastructure as a service have fundamentally changed the economics of launching software companies. Another thing is SaaS business models. And again, we know this, we talk about it a lot. I'm not saying SaaS is perfect. Good God, it's definitely not. But it's a lot easier in many ways than on-premise software had been, in the sense that, doing an initial trial, an initial installation, this idea of being able to get updates, from the vendor directly, technical support tends to be a little bit easier to manage. There's a whole bunch of reasons why SaaS has dramatically lowered the barrier to entry for new software companies to come to play. The other thing here is then open source and APIs. I mean, I have a friend of mine who launched a software company last year. You'll be happy to know it wasn't in marketing. And it was him and one other guy he hired, and they ended up with like state-of-the-art, relational, non-relational databases, state-of-the-art web frameworks, state-of-the-art front-end interfaces that they were using for both web and mobile applications. And you know how much all this stuff cost them? $0. I mean, $0 hard costs. There was still their time of putting this stuff together. But man, with open source, and then you take these APIs that are available from all sorts of companies. I mean, Google's a incredible provider. The Google Maps API, all these things that people can tap into, either free or cheap. This is huge. We're also seeing other aspects of this cloud environment. This connection of global talent and knowledge. Right? I mean, my friend, he actually hired his first engineer through a contract on Odesk, Elance. There's a guy, thankfully not based out of the Ukraine, out of Greece, right? And they've ended up working out great. They got a QA person who I think is based out of Iowa. They're using now all this software for online project management, for video conferencing. They can Skype for free video, discussions, share each other's screens. If someone has a question, if they hit a technical stumbling block, my background was as an engineer, and so I remember in the ancient days, you could get a technical problem with a piece of software that could grind your development to a halt. You could spend weeks trying to figure this out. Now you go online, you've got things like Stack Overflow, Quora, these communities, Google these things. I mean, the ability to solve these things in a matter of hours, if not minutes, totally changes the game. And then, we can only thank ourselves for this. It used to be that if you wanted to go to market with a new product, and have any real chance at all, you need to do a lot of money in advertising and a lot of money in a sales force. And don't get me wrong, if you have a lot of money for advertising and a sales force, that still helps a lot today too. But the point is you don't need it. There's a lot of these companies who have come to market using inbound marketing, content marketing, highly targeted advertising to go after particular niches that changes the economics. And so if you take any single one of these, you could be like, right, they're revolutionary. You take all of them together, and this is a very different market for software than anything we've ever seen before. And I think what's interesting is the digital marketing world is the first large-scale business market that we've seen that was born natively in this environment. So I'm not actually convinced that the dynamics of previous software markets are going to play out the same way now. And don't get me wrong, I definitely think there's going to be consolidation, right? We're constantly seeing this, some incredible M&A activity. There are companies that will go out of business here. But as long as on the other side of this equation, you continue to have people launching new ventures, and as long as that inflow is at least as equal to, if not greater than the outflow, then we're looking at basically a long-term environment of 1,000+ marketing technology vendors. Now, being said, I do think there's going to be some phenomenal changes in the structure of that market. I'd like to, hypothesize a bit about this. I'll give you some data to back up why I feel this way, but let me clarify. This is definitely just a hypothesis, that this consolidation is not going to be evenly distributed, that it's going to be based, in particular, have its greatest impact around these marketing backbone platforms and marketing middleware. And the reason why is because really these become the foundations of data. If each of these backbone platforms has had a piece of data that they've been sort of the master of. CRM has typically been the one for the core customer data record. But again, I think that's actually going to change. But this idea that core customer data actually becomes this coordinating mechanism along which we can have many different pieces in our marketing stack coordinated, orchestrated, working together. I feel that the data consolidation side of this is 1 billion times more likely, all right, maybe that's a tad of an exaggeration, 1 million times more likely than consolidation around things like process and business insight or customer experiences, because these things have such high variance from one business to another. It's in many cases the secret sauce of one business versus another. But core customer data, this can be a consolidating mechanism. I think what you're seeing right now is a lot of these players in the backbone system, backbone arena, this middleware group, they are all eyeing being the owner of the core customer data. And that'll be really interesting to see how that shakes out. But I think one of the things that will come out of that is there will be a smaller number of platforms to choose from that we use as our foundation. Now, my hypothesis is, rather than reduce the total number of marketing technology vendors overall, that's going to cause the number of technologies out there to actually explode. Because one of the things that holds us back right now is integration. It's just such hard work. But as you start to have these more standardized systems for managing data and customer data, it actually makes it easier. Yes, I'll add you to the graphic, I promise. You start to make it easier for people to plug this stuff in. And that's going to, I believe, inspire an incredible explosion of new software vendors at the layer above that. And that actually these platform companies are really going to want to encourage that, because this is the incredible power of being a dominant exchange in a platform business. You see it right now between iOS and Android, and why it's so incredibly hard for anyone else to now break into that space. You saw it with Windows. I mean, Microsoft has seen better days, but they had a good 20, 25 years where Windows became the dominant platform. Because when you have a platform that attracts developers, this gives you more capabilities that you can provide your customers, which in turn attracts more customers, which in turn attracts more developers, and you get this virtuous cycle. So becoming a dominant platform is incredibly powerful as a strategy. And I think you're starting to see some of the companies in this backbone space pursue this. Marketo in their, launch point effort, Acton in their partner program, ExactTarget in their, hub exchange. I mean, these things are still nascent, but they're pointing in that direction. And this offers these companies more than just, the vying for the, rights of the platform ecosystem. It helps them with things like sales. I mean, it's no longer my platform doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all. It can be sort of a, mostly fits and then is lightly tailored by third-party applications. It actually changes this thing about the challenge software vendors face with change. It makes it a judo move on this. I mean, you think it's hard as a marketer when you have to adopt to a new social network or Google changes their rules or APIs. Well, think about the poor guys who are building the software to actually, rely on those interfaces. Every time these changes happen, that can become a lot of work for them. And if you're trying to do that all yourself, it's really, really hard. But if you've got this platform where as long as anyone in your ecosystem is able to say, oh, well, there's this new social network out here. I can do a little app for that, plug it in, connect into your environment. Huge advantage. And this is why I'm actually very skeptical on the strategies of, one suite to rule them all, that you'll just go to one vendor, they'll give you one big package, and it'll just do all the marketing you want perfectly, just because I think marketing's just too big for that. I don't think marketing's getting any smaller. And I think what we'll see is some of these folks who have played the, suite strategy card are, going to shift just enough to say, hey, yes, this will still be your foundation, but it's going to be a more open foundation. And I would, again, I said this is a hypothesis. Let me point to a little bit of the data of, why I think this can work. If you look at CRM as its own space, I mean, Salesforce has just crushed it. And I think one of the reasons they've crushed it is because they took this open ecosystem approach. I mean, right now they have over, 2,100 apps that you can plug in and customize Salesforce to your needs. Another example, WordPress. This is the largest content management system platform in the world. I mean, something like 60 million sites, run WordPress. And it's open source, which is a whole other scary discussion for people in the space. But one of the things that's really interesting is it's an open environment, too. So there's something like 30,000 plugins for WordPress that you can use to customize in all sorts of cool ways. And I'll be honest, most of those 30,000 are crap. But there's actually quite a few hundred of them that are really, really good. I think it's been one of the keys to WordPress's domination. All right, so that's the supply side. Let's talk a little bit about the demand side, because this is a lot of choice. And do we have the appetite for that? I'd like to start by saying choice is good, right? If you repeat after me, choice is good, choice is good. I mean, if you say it enough times, you might almost believe it. But really, I mean, if you just step back from the chaos for a moment, the general rules of capitalism are choice is very good, right? Competition drives down prices, it drives innovation up, particularly because we're in marketing, more choices gives us more opportunities to differentiate our customer experience from competitors. Choice is good. I mean, choice is easy. And in particular, in marketing technology, there are 3 risks, probably more, but there's 3 that we, see very common. There's integration risk. How do we get this stuff to actually work all together? There's vendor risk of, well, what happens if I bet on this vendor and then they go out of business or they're acquired and somebody changes the licensing scheme on me? And then there's management risk, like, okay, well, even if all that stuff goes well, are we going to take advantage of this the right way to get value out of it? And one interesting thing I'll point out is that this platformization, this moving to open ecosystems in these backbone platforms, will help with integration risk and vendor risk. It'll simplify integrations. I'm not saying they're going to be simple, but they will be simplified. And it'll also help reduce vendor risk, because now these large platforms will actually be fairly stable entities, because they will be the central repositories of your data. If you have an application that you put on top of that comes and goes, it's not going to be the end of the world. But then we still have management risk, and that's not going away. And I feel like, damn it, Jim, I'm a marketer, not a systems administrator. We feel this. By the way, if there are those of you in the audience who are scratching your head and you're like, who the heck is that guy? Maybe this will work a little bit better. Oh, yeah, all right. This is an executive conference, so we get the first one. So before my time is up here, I want to actually give you a little bit of help. I mean, because I feel like all I've been doing is telling you, oh, by the way, there's a lot of technology. Good luck. So I'd like to give you a little bit of help on dealing with it. And I feel there's two ways I could do that. One is I could talk about actual practices of technology management. But the truth is, trying to do that in 40 minutes is crazy. I mean, the guy from IBM was talking about their 48-month plan for how they do that. So I'm not going to do that in 40 minutes. It'd be impossible. So I realized actually it's probably doing it in 4 minutes is equally as impossible. So why don't we give that a try? So I'm going to walk through just a few things that are really for a follow-up conversation of how do you think about managing marketing technology to make this reasonable? And the 10 things I would say, and this slide will be available, you start with collaboration. We all know this, but it's not just between marketing and IT. It's all the stakeholders, marketing, IT, sales, finance. These conversations have to happen, and it's surprising still the number of organizations where they don't. The next step of this, it isn't even technology. It's just governance. Again, trying to get away from this notion of shadow IT, understanding, in a relationship with IT, how are we going to govern technology purchases? You don't need a 50-page, manual for this, but I think having some ground rules in bullets so people know how they're staffing for this, where the exchange of information is going to be is incredibly helpful. There's then prioritizing. I mean, one of the best things you can do with that map of 1,000 marketing technology vendors, I think, is burn it. And, really say, okay, what are the 1 or 2 things we need to focus on now to deliver really great experiences to our customers? And let's focus on those and get them right. And then we'll expand from there. Along those lines, Elle, I think in her presentation yesterday, had that great phrase, done is better than perfect. There are people out there looking for the ultimate marketing technology stack. Don't be that person. It's, Don Quixote would, relate, satisfy. What matters with technology is that you have the capabilities to do some core things. But what really ends up making the difference 9 times out of 10 is how you use those capabilities in great marketing. And once you know that, you can take a little breather and say, we don't need the perfect marketing stack. We just need a good marketing stack. Iterate. We don't try and do this all as one big thing. Let's get pieces out, and then improve them over time. Categorize. All marketing technology is not created equal. And when you're talking about governance, you don't want to be governing all marketing technology equally. There's a level of work you're doing with deciding core backbone systems that's very different than, say, picking up a little app to do, some social media marketing. Standardize the core data. And really the trick to this is just agreeing on what is core. Again, I would say in that satisficing thing, this idea of the perfect 360-degree view of the customer, it's a nice vision. For most companies, it's really out of reach. And trying too hard for that at this point is actually the cost-benefit ratio of, the benefit you get out of that relative to the energy and time you put into it is a diminishing return. Versus saying, hey, actually, we're going to have a really good 180-degree view of the customer, and we're going to be able to get that together in 3 to 6 months. Know what the core data is. Open, the arguments I gave you in the past, a few slides there about, minimizing integration risk, minimizing vendor risk. Look for these open systems. Kind of related to this idea is you start to put multiple things together, try and just minimize the dependencies between them. You want to loosely couple them. And then last but not least, this idea of specializing. I guess this is kind of another way of just, the categorization, but what I really want to emphasize here is this idea of empowering different groups within marketing to find the tools that work best for them. I'm not saying every group in marketing should get to buy their own CRM or their own marketing automation system or their own, web CMS. No, you don't want to do that. But if you have a content marketing team, why not let them actually use a whole bunch of these really cheap, non-integration dependent tools to do really great content marketing management? Give them the freedom to really find the right ways to incorporate technology in their work. These are different types of technology. So the truth is, the reason why I said, try and do this in 40 minutes or 4 minutes, there's only so much you can get out of that. And probably those of you in the room will do a better job with that list than most. The thing I want to sort of end with is what I think is actually the more helpful place to make investments in marketing technology. And I'll introduce this with a little story. I apologize for the graininess of this picture. It is a photo from 1990-something that I won't give away. This is a sailboat I was looking at buying. I was a 20-something, living in Florida, had been reading a lot of books about, these people who had sailed around the world. And being a bit of a romantic, it's just, this vision of, I got in my head, this is what I should do. I should buy a sailboat, and I should sail around the world. What an amazing thing that would be. And so, of course, anyone who gets an idea of like, hey, I should sail around the world, I did the very first thing you're supposed to do, which is, well, let's go look for a boat to buy. Now, I didn't actually know how to sail. These tiny little details. I'll tell you how this story ends over a drink sometime. Am I being too subtle in my metaphor here with marketing technology? Looking for the boat isn't necessarily the place to start. That these things about marketing technology, strategy, and management, these are capabilities. And to just be very blunt, they're capabilities that most organizations don't have a lot of experience with. And we really need to invest in developing those capabilities in order to be good at figuring out how do we make all these technology pieces work. This quote that Gartner has gotten so much press for, and by the way, do not bring this up in any group meeting of IT professionals. It's just not a popular quote, because they kind of look at this as, the kid in us, come on, it's like, hey, all right, I've got IT. And the CIO is just like, oh my God. And to be honest, in many ways, this is a fair impression for them to have. Because, CIOs, IT departments have spent decades dealing with technology management. Now, most of them don't have as much experience with marketing technology management, which is a little bit of a different beast, but they understand that technology management is actually hard. And so when we look at this way in which I'm a big believer that marketing needs to have ownership of the technology that it's using. I don't mean necessarily, you have sole ownership of it. I'm talking, it's less about who actually, signed off on the, purchase order, and really, are you bought in to using this technology to deliver amazing marketing and remarkable customer experiences? That's the sort of ownership you need, And then to do that, you absolutely should be collaborating with your IT department. But to do this, you have to recognize marketing needs both marketing technology expertise, and it needs a certain level of marketing technology authority. And I think where things get messy is when those things fall out of alignment. Like if marketing just starts spending money on its own technology stack without actually having this expertise, that's sort of the cowboy image that the IT people get really freaked out about. But there's the other side of it, right? I mean, you've got cases where marketers who are getting very digitally savvy are constrained by the rules of engagement from their IT department, and they become prisoners to those policies that were made from a different era. There are some people who are still not worrying about this on either dimension, and I think they're in real competitive trouble. And then the sweet spot is to advance along both of these dimensions together. And I think the best way to do this, to acquire this capability, is to look at the talent and the staffing. That increasingly, both in IT and marketing, we want these people who are fluent with both sides of the equation. It used to be a world where we had people who were really good at engineering and IT, and we had people who were really good at marketing, and never the two shall meet. But now we're seeing in this digital world people coming around who, they're these marketing technologists in agencies. They're creative technologists. The term growth hacker, chief digital officers, what they're trying to do of leveraging technology and marketing, data scientists. There's this whole class of people who are becoming fluent at leveraging technology in the pursuit of marketing. And again, these people can come from IT, they can come from marketing. There's many different flavors. But the point is, having this sort of talent starts to give you that intuition that becomes so powerful for developing marketing technology management capabilities. Now, you can't just have these people randomly wandering through the halls. You want a little bit of structure for this. There's many ways you can do this. I'm going to show you one way that I've seen a number of other folks endorse. Certainly the CIO and the CMO need to be collaborating. If they aren't, there's big trouble. But then you need this role of, I call it a chief marketing technologist. Other companies, it's the global head of marketing technology. I've heard companies hire a CTO in marketing. Frankly, I think marketing operations and the head of marketing operations is in many ways the default owner of this role. Basically, someone who is the right hand to the CMO about how are we organizing all of the technology that we're using in marketing for marketing's sake. Now, certainly doing that in collaboration with the CIO to make sure that we're adhering to good IT governance, we're addressing security policies, privacy policies, But again, this is all in the service of delivering great marketing. So if you have, depending on the size of your company, you might have multiple people who help with this. They would all report up to this role. And this role isn't just about the technology. It's about helping the rest of the marketing team really effectively leverage this technology. The people who are really great in this role are educators, they're advocates, they're helping people get more out of their other marketing programs. Gartner did a little bit of research on this. They surveyed companies 500 million or more in revenue, so very large companies, and they asked them, how many of you have this kind of a role? And 81% actually claim they have this role. The titles just vary tremendously, so you may actually have this role and not even know it. But one of the interesting things they asked in their most recent survey was, okay, well, what is this role responsible for? So let's forget about titles for a moment and just talk, what are they bringing to the table? And the 5 things that kept coming up were this aligning marketing technology with business goals, facilitating projects, communicating between marketing and IT. This is helping marketing get more effective value out of IT. Selecting, evaluating, choosing marketing technology providers. Prioritizing funding for marketing technologies. This prioritization piece is huge. And then even more so, starting to lean in this direction of chief digital officers and whatnot, helping to craft technology-enabled digital business models. This sort of capability is the one game changer that you can really bring to your organization. And then from there, you're able to go into the, more of the details of, okay, how are we going to manage the evolution of our stack and our strategy? So how did we do? We tipped over, didn't we? It was somewhere around, like that big marketing experiences list. You're like, okay, wow, yeah, no, not enough coffee in the world. I'll open it up for a couple minutes of questions. Before I do, I'll shamelessly plug a free book I put up on my site a couple weeks ago. Completely free. You can just download it. There's no email you have to fill out or anything. I was trying to just capture a bit of the story of how marketing has changed to become a technology-enabled, technology-powered discipline. So if you have a chance to pick it up, I'd love to hear what you think. So I think we have time for maybe 1 or 2 questions. That's either really good or really bad. Wait, someone over there, yes. Do we have mics? See, this is the bird's eye view.
So, my question is really around, you said that there's going to be some consolidation of the infrastructure layer and then the data piece in terms of who owns the customer data. So who are you seeing as kind of the key players, kind of who are likely candidates to, and where do they stand in that ownership spectrum? As you said, there's marketing automation data that's sitting in a marketing automation tool. There's a CRM data that's over here. So there's all these different data pieces. So are you seeing any evolution, and where do you see the different players in that evolution?
I think if you take a look at who the players are today, right, we probably know all of them, right? It's the Adobe, it's the IBM, it's Marketo, it's Salesforce. I don't think that will be the sole set of large players. I think we will see some other very large ones, partly through acquisition and partly through organic.
You didn't mention Oracle, or you didn't mention SAP.
And that was my fault, yeah. Oracle absolutely is one of them. Boy, I'm sure glad Jill Rowley isn't here. I'd be like, dead. Yeah, Oracle is absolutely one of them. I mean, again, basically, you see the people who are basically making, multi-billion-dollar investments either through their own growth or through acquisition in this space, and they're clearly making this play.
Okay, but you don't have anything specific on where things stand on the customer data ownership. It's still fragmented in your view, though.
It is still fragmented, but again, it feels like right now most companies have two sources of fragmentation. And some have many more, of course. But right now, the real struggle is between how much is in the CRM and how much is in the marketing automation system. And what's really interesting is while these two groups are, dogfighting, this new category around the middleware layer, in particular some of these customer data platforms. There's a guy by the name of David Raab, R-A-A-B, just a brilliant independent analyst. I think he's actually the guy who's coined the term customer data platform. Find his blog. He really goes into some incredible depth of the players who are in that space. And that's interesting because they're basically like, okay, well, you have your CRM and you have your marketing automation, and we'll come up above that, just aggregate that data, and now we become actually the center of gravity for this customer data stuff. So I think that's a really interesting cluster.
Okay, great, thanks.
Any others? One more.
Thank you. Great stuff, Scott. You talked about for all of this stuff to come together, there really kind of being integration standards. And I'm curious to whether you see that as a third party helping set that, or is it just these systems are going to duke it out in terms of the best ways to do it? And then what can we kind of collectively as marketers do to help influence that, speed that along, and do that in the best way?
That's a great question. So certainly today they're duking it out. It's kind of like iOS and Android. It's like, well, there's just not a universal standard for it at this point. It would be really great if there was. I'll say I don't see any hints of that in the marketplace right now, so I suspect it will be a while. Certainly the idea of, groups like this, right? We didn't get together this way, a few years ago. This is an emerging group of marketing technology, marketing operations leaders. And I think as we start to see have more gatherings like this, we start to see associations, professional groups, there will become an opportunity for the voice of this community to leverage a lot of influence over vendors. And so I think we will start to see that over the few years ahead. One piece that could be really interesting, I don't know if this will happen, but there is a distinct absence of open source players in this sort of core area. And I think that will change, partly because you look at all those companies that are trying to innovate in this space who aren't already the big players. Not all of them are going to be able to win on a commercial basis. And I think some of them are going to start to play the open source card. We'll see what that does. But that might be another factor that could really, over time, sort of change the standardization dialogue in this space. So my clock is running in the opposite direction. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott. Appreciate it.